Hello folks, J. Scott Phillips here, and once again we are bound for the final frontier. Steve Donahue has done it again. He's created a new original tag for Book Trek, the Summer of Trek 2023, which is a BookTube event created by Vin at Revenant Reads to celebrate Star Trek fiction. And Steve has created one now for Deep Space Nine, a series of prompts that are reflected from characters from that particular Star Trek series. And a few weeks ago, he created one for The Next Generation, and I have a video up for that. And I also see that he did one a few weeks before that for the original series, and I've missed that somehow. So I may want to go back and do that because of all the Star Trek series to date. The original one is my favorite by far. That's the one that I grew up with ever since a kid, watching it in first run on NBC back in the late 60s. So I feel that I should go back and do that one as well before the Summer of Trek ends here in another week or two. So we'll see if I can get to that. But for now, I'm going to be doing the Deep Space Nine tag that Steve has put up. And again, like the other two, these are nosy questions. They're not really about books. They're just nosy questions because Steve is a nosy kind of guy. So we'll launch into this, but first I'm reflecting back on the Next Generation tag that was running a few weeks ago, and one of the questions on that, which is not on this list, is to reflect on your relationship with that particular show. And I feel like I should probably touch on that for Deep Space Nine. And as a lifelong Star Trek fan myself, I never really got into Deep Space Nine. I was not a particular fan of The Next Generation, but I watched many episodes of that and came to like it more and more as time went on. Deep Space Nine I never really got into. There is something about the exploration factor that is one of the main things I always liked about the original Star Trek. And The Next Generation as well. They were out exploring new things. And, of course, it was famously pitched to NBC as Wagon Train to the Stars. So that implied always going out and pushing the edge of that frontier. And that was primarily involving exploration in many cases. And I loved all that. The Next Generation did a lot of that as well. And then Deep Space Nine took a different approach, and it was an interesting approach. And just like the original series was Wagon Train to the Stars, when I first started hearing about Deep Space Nine, I felt that it sounded like it was going to be more like Gunsmoke to the Stars. It was more about a frontier town, if you were going to make a Western analogy, on the edge of a frontier, but it was where civilization was meeting the Wild West. And in this case, I thought this was going to be a space station that was on the edge of a frontier. And it did not have the roaming starships and the exploration aspect to it. Instead, it was more dealing with the local indigenous people and some military aspects of that strategic position of the space station. And that has not been something that I really sought after for Star Trek. So that was one little hurdle. Now, my understanding is that the show got really good after a while, and it's got its definite fans. And I need to go back as a Star Trek fan myself. I feel like I have to eat my vegetables and go back and give it a serious shot. Something I've never really done. I tried starting it a few times, and honestly, the thing that really kind of stopped me from getting too far was Avery Brooks' performances. I just never felt that he was a very good actor. And I know I'll get some grief for that. But honestly, it just seemed like bad acting. Maybe he got better as it went along. I did see a few episodes here and there where I could sit through it. I really enjoyed the one episode where they go back in time to Kirk's Enterprise with the Tribbles. I've watched that one many times. I still saw some aspects of Mr. Brooks's acting that I ground my teeth a little bit about it. But I do understand and can appreciate from what I've heard of the series that his character was an excellent character. So I really do need to give it a fairer shake, I think, and get over myself. And maybe I'm wrong. I might be totally wrong about his acting ability. Maybe he improved. I don't know. But I promise that I will give it a fair shake here, as I should, and probably like a lot of you have anyway, and think I'm just goofy for even having that as a hurdle for a otherwise really excellent Star Trek franchise. But let's set all that aside now and get into these questions here that Steve Donahue has put together based on the characters and the ensemble cast of Deep Space Nine. Starting with question number 1, Captain SISKO, the Emissary. And the question is, are you religious? Does organized religion play any role in your life? And I am not religious. And I was not brought up going to church, although my parents tried taking me to church for a little while when I was a kid. It didn't really stick. My dad, who felt that, well, this should be an experience that I have as a kid going to church, like a lot of my friends and other families and friends of ours were doing, so that I would have that experience and decide for myself. And it was, to me, it kind of, as I was probably 8 or 9, so I was already kind of settled into the fact that I had not been indoctrinated into any church up until a time when I was kind of conscious of losing a Sunday morning every week. And my parents were, I think, trying to do some due diligence in getting me to go to church and have that experience. Didn't take. And one day I realized that it had been a few weeks since we had gone, we had not gone in several weeks on Sunday morning, and I thought I was just kind of getting off lucky. And then at one point I asked my dad what happened to going to church. I was kind of didn't want to bring it up because maybe he forgot, but he just said, we're not doing that anymore. And I asked, well, why not? And he said that it was because they started sending him bills. So I don't know what his tithing practice had been, but it seemed like it was more of an economic reason to stop going than anything else. I don't think it was me that influenced him at all. But I did believe in, we were Presbyterian. So I did believe in the Bible and all. I didn't really question the reality of it. I had a lot of questions that didn't make sense to me. And those questions that I was asking my parents and even asked in my Sunday school that I was going to. I didn't get to go to the actual church. I went to the Sunday school. I was too young for the grown-up church, which I probably would have enjoyed more. But I just never got any real answers. They seemed like double talk to me. Even as a 8 or 9-year-old kid, I wasn't buying it. The answers were not satisfying. I just felt like they didn't really know what they were talking about themselves and were just telling me something by rote almost. And reading I didn't have an adult Bible at that time. I did have one of those big children's Bible storybooks that raised all these questions to me. And that was my only reference. I would go and try to look things up in that. And it was just telling stories. It had no explanations for any kid with a question. It just didn't stick. And then when I was in my mid-30s, by then I considered myself agnostic or atheist and had fallen in love with science by that time. So felt like I was getting answers elsewhere that didn't really disprove God or religion, but it didn't. The answers and the questions that I was asking didn't require a God or religion to make sense of things to me. So I was going more that route. And in my mid-30s, I started to question if I had given religion a fair shake. So I had a number of religious friends, Christian friends, that were always encouraging me to go to church with them and all that. And it occurred to me one day that as an adult, I had never really given it a fair shake. And so I decided that maybe I should take some of my friends up and go to church a few times and really, pay attention to it and give it its worth as an adult now, rather than as a kid just asking stupid questions. And so I kind of was putting it off, but then one day I can only explain it as a spiritual experience, I guess, is all I can say. I won't go into the details, but it convinced me that, hey, there might be something to this. And the gist of it was that the message I felt I was getting is that relax, you don't have to take all of this on faith all at once. You can just start with a little bit and then try it out and test it out and ask your questions. And I had friends that were telling me that if you just give it a chance, your faith will grow. So I tried that. And I started going to a Saddleback Community Church. The big super church back then was just getting started, Rick Warren's church in El Toro, South Orange County here. And it was being run out of a high school then. And so it was kind of it was a pretty robust church, but it did not have its own campus yet. They were using a high school on weekends for that. And I got pretty involved in it at that time, and it was a lot of fun, actually. But after 3 years, probably 2 years into it, I started to realize that I'm not really seeing these people that are very faithful and religious, and they really speak passionately about it, having any better luck in life than just a schmo like me or other people that I knew well that didn't go to church. They still seem to have all the same problems and everything, and all the same emotional troubles as anybody else. I didn't see it. I didn't see their faith or the religion itself actually helping anybody, really. I didn't see a reason to accept this based on anything that was going on around the people that I was hanging out with at that church in those days. And it finally just evaporated from me completely. And I reverted completely back to what I had been before. And I remain as today. So that's a long answer, but that's my experience with religion and how it plays a part in my life. So there you have it. Question number 2. Major Kira, the former resistance fighter, have you ever been in any kind of combat, armed or unarmed? And I would not say combat. I have been in unarmed fights. I wouldn't really consider it combat. And it was very young playground stuff, just as a kid in elementary school and a little bit in junior high school. I got bullied from time to time and just learned to deal with that. And I was never a big fighter, although I I did my best to defend myself. And I think that it turned out that I was not an adversary worthy of anyone to bother with too much after a while. But it did give me kind of a confidence in that I always seem to survive those things pretty well. The only thing that was really injured was my pride more than anything else. I never really got hurt badly. And so after a few years of that, when I was just a really little kid, when I was being approached in a threatening manner, I just had kind of a demeanor of like, oh, this again. And I think a lot of the demeanor I had of just like, yeah, this is just going to be more trouble than it's going to be worth. I wasn't scared. I didn't put up a strong fight, but it didn't matter to me. I knew I was going to get through this, and the worst that was going to happen is that I was going to just be a little embarrassed or something, and that was it. And I think that took a lot of the steam out of my friends' anger or bullying natures, that I just wasn't worth the trouble. So I got through that, and in any kind of aggressive threat that I've had since then throughout my life, I've always just felt this kind of calm wash over me, and I said, well, we'll get through this. And it always seems to take the wind out of whose ever sails, It just doesn't happen much anymore, but every so often, if something like that happens, I just kind of fall back into that. All right, let's just get through this, and then we can both move on, kind of a thing. So, is that combat? I don't think it was really combat, but fighting. That's my background. And now, question number 3. Chief Engineer O'Brien, Keiko's husband. Have you ever had, or do you currently have, a nagging wife? If so, how often do you contemplate killing her and making it look like an accident? Well, I'm not married, so I don't have a nagging wife. I have had a lot of nagging friends, both male and female, and there's been no problem with that, really. My mother enjoyed nagging both my father and myself, but again, that's I never contemplated killing anybody or making it look like an accident. At least not for nagging, maybe for some other things, but that's another story, and Steve didn't ask that question. So, question number 4, Constable Odo, the shapeshifter. Do you shapeshift in your daily life? Are you very different in different settings, so much so that we on BookTube would be surprised? And maybe in some regards, but not anything unexpected, I don't think. On BookTube, the way I present myself is pretty much how I am in this kind of a setting. Now, when there are extreme situations where I'm having particular types of emotional reactions, I think I react more aggressively or passively or emotionally or whatever you might say in accordance with the situation, but nothing extreme. I don't think it would be anything that you would be shocked at any more than I might be shocked at anything that you might do or friends of mine might do. So I don't really think I shapeshift. I have been told that when I've been drinking that my friends can tell that I've got a little buzz going on, but I remain Scott. I'm still me, and I don't become a mean drunk or an emotional weepy drunk or anything like that. I'm just maybe a little happier or something, but that's about it. So I don't think I shift any shapes. So question number 5, Science Officer Jedidiah Dax. I'm not even sure if that's how you pronounce it, as well as I know this show here. So Jedidiah Dax, centuries old. What's your relationship with science? Have you ever studied it? How much of it plays a part in your life? And I think, like I was intimating a bit during the religious question earlier on, I'm a big fan of science and have been since I was a kid, as far as I can remember, because I was a curious kid and I had a lot of questions, and science seemed to provide me satisfying answers that I could understand. So not only was it an answer that I was presented with, but I could understand how it worked, and they were aha moments for me in almost every case. Some of them were a little trickier, like when I was in high school and college and trying to grapple with relativity and quantum physics and that kind of a thing. I never got into the math of anything at all, but I could understand kind of when things were put in layman's terms. I could get a grasp of it, and then but as far as things like astronomy, and speaking of Star Trek here, I think I can credit Mr. Spock for a lot of this, because as a kid I would watch the original series and Spock was always figuring things out. Now, his science was never often real science, but in the context of the show, he was doing science and figuring things out scientifically. He never came to a magical answer, a fantastical answer for anything, really. It was always, within the context of the show, based on the science that worked within the context of the show. And I learned early on that I could apply that myself. I got into astronomy probably because of Star Trek and other science fiction things like that. I had a telescope as a kid. I learned where all the stars were, all the constellations. that kind of a thing. And physics, when I was in high school, another buddy of mine who was also kind of a science geek, he and I took physics together, and we really enjoyed that. And in the lab of that class, just a high school class, we learned how to do all that stuff, some of the early fundamentals and things. So it was clear to me that science actually worked, as opposed to anything supernatural. Science worked to me, and so I've embraced it all my life, really. So it does play an important part of my life, and I enjoy it. It's a lot of fun to learn all that kinds of things. I always have that aha moment when I finally grab a hold of a particular science. There's so many different sciences. One of the things I've noticed the difference between religion and science is that there are all different kinds of religions in the world, and they're all competing. If one of them is true, the rest cannot be true. There are all kinds of sciences in the world, but they all support each other. When one shows one thing, it supports some aspect of other sciences as well. No real science competes or disproves or undermines any other science. To me, that's compelling just in itself. So that's my observation between science and religion, kind of joining the two questions together there. And then question number 6, Jake Sisko, the commander's son. Were you annoying as a kid? How annoying on a scale of 8 to 10 are your own kids? Well, I don't have any kids of my own, so I can't really answer that question. I think if I did have kids, that they would have been 10s on that annoying scale there. But was I annoying myself as a kid? And I never really felt that I was, although after my years in college and had long since moved out of the house, out of my parents' home, one time visiting my folks, we were chatting, my dad and I were chatting about my childhood and all that, and he just looked at me and he said, "You were a bit of a pill, you know that?" So I guess my dad might think that I was annoying. I don't know where I would fall on the scale of 8 to 10, but my dad's not here to answer that, so I won't pursue it any further. And then question number 7, Lieutenant Worf, Chief of Security. Was there ever a time when you were embarrassed by your parents? What role do they play in your life? And I can't think of anything specific other than the fact that my mother was a bit of a doting mother. And I think that was embarrassing sometimes when she did it in front of some of my little friends when I was a kid. Not so much once I got into high school or college. Then I think we all all my good friends knew her pretty well. She was great friends with all of my friends that would hang out. And so they kind of knew her. So it wasn't embarrassing after everyone got to know each other. But as a little kid, it could be trying from time to time. And what role do they play in your life? Well, they're both gone now. But I think I had a great childhood. And I have many fond memories. And my dad especially, I think that's probably typical for sons, but I never really got to be close friends with him. He was always kind of a serious guy until he retired. And then I was long gone out of the house by then. But after he retired, he loosened up and he was just a funny guy, an easygoing guy. And as I remember him as a kid, when he was very serious and just focused on all the responsibilities that he had, I think, as the head of the family, I think weighed him down a lot, and he was very serious. And after he retired and didn't have to worry about all of that, different guy. I mean, the same guy, but just a lighthearted nature to him. And one regret I have about hanging out with my father was that I never got to have a drink with him, because at some time in late high school and my college years, he had a bad drinking problem for a while, and he was unemployed, and he was just kind of a reaction to that, and it was not good around the house in those days. And at one point, he got very ill as a result of it and wound up in the hospital. And the doctors told him, you can't drink like this anymore. You just can't do it. And he just quit cold turkey. And so after that, he never touched alcohol ever again. And by the time I was out of the house and drinking myself, I couldn't have a drink with my pop. And I feel like I'm kind of choking up a little bit right now, but we'll get past that. I never got to have a drink with the guy. And here's to you, Pop. Question number 8. Quark, you're not so friendly bartender. Just talking about drinking here. Are you consumed with greed? Do you manage money well? And what kind of role does it play in your life? Well, I'm not consumed by greed or with greed. I don't think. I do get greedy on certain things from time to time, but I'm not compelled or driven by greed. I'm not, a Wizard of Wall Street kind of guy whatsoever. Do you manage money well? Probably not. Again, going back to my dad, he was a controller and an accountant by trade, and he loved digging into the books and figuring out investments and planning for everybody's future and all of that stuff. And I would be a great disappointment to him on that score. And so if he's looking down at me right now, he's just shaking his head at the amount of money I've managed to save over my life here. But what kind of a role does money play in my life? Probably pretty much like everybody that isn't obsessed with it. I think I have what I need, and I don't worry too much about it, which may not be exactly true, but I'm not compulsive about it. And then finally, and here's a character I really have no idea about who or what he is, other than very superficially. But question 9, Gul Dukat. Gul, I want to say Gal Gadot. Gul Dukat. Dukat, is that how you say it? This is embarrassing because as a Star Trek fan my whole life, I don't know these very basic characters here from Deep Space Nine. The Honorable Enemy. Have you ever worn padded leather, had a complete mental breakdown, and thrown around bolts of mystical energy? No, no, and no. I'm trying to think. The closest that may be is I may have worn some padded leather at some point, maybe as a costume or something, but I've never had any of that as any kind of a wardrobe. I have yet to have a mental breakdown, so I'm looking forward to that. And as far as throwing bolts of mystical energy around, the closest I can come to this, and I wouldn't consider it bolts of mystical energy, although it's mystical in a way, but at one point I kind of got into reading tarot cards as just sort of a hobby, really, and just as kind of something fun to do, mostly for Halloween. I mentioned in another video at one point how a circle of friends and I used to put on an annual haunted house for Halloween, and I played a character for the people waiting in line out front, Romany Jack Sullivan, and I was an Irish tinker, and that was the character I would play. I had a costume for that and everything. Didn't involve any padded leather, but I would read tarot cards for people that were reading in line, so that was kind of fun. I wasn't throwing any bolts of mystical energy. However, I was reading, aside from our haunted house, I was reading tarot cards for a friend of mine. This girl was interested in that, and she felt that she could get some fortune telling information out of me if I read her tarot cards, and she really believed in this stuff. And so I had, at one time, I couldn't do it now, I don't think, without studying up again, but I was pretty good at reading the cards, and I used the Celtic layout, and could kind of make a good case for any of the cards, and I think make a little compelling story telling somebody. And so those were based on asking questions. You could ask a question about your future or your character, those kinds of things that you were interested in. And the first couple of spreads that I read for her, I just went by the book, basically. And then she asked me another question that I thought, I'm just going to make something up, just out of whole cloth. and has nothing to do with the cards that I put down, but I just made something up. And she thought that would just hit the nail on the head so completely and so perfectly. How could I know these kinds of things about her and all of that? And I just made it up. And that's pretty much something that convinced me that there is absolutely nothing to fortune telling, astrology, tarot cards, or anything, because you can say anything and people that want to believe something will believe it and be amazed that you even came close. And that's it. That's all the questions here. So I guess that was a kind of a little emotional BookTube tag for me there, Steve Donahue. So I'll have to get even with you for that somehow. But it was fun to answer these questions. And again, I think I'm going to have to go back and do the original series tag, because that's where my heart lies as far as Star Trek goes. And I don't know, maybe Steve will be coming up with one for Voyager, Star Trek Voyager, maybe. Here, we got still another week in to go for Book Trek, and we'll see. And there you have it. So I don't have anyone to tag here. I think Steve has tagged all of his co-hosts that are part of Book Trek already. So I'll just, anyone who watches this that feels like they want to answer these questions, if they're in particular a Deep Space Nine fan, and I apologize to the Deep Space Nine fans in particular for my lack of knowledge or fandom of that particular franchise. But I'll let you go. Have fun with the tag if you care to join in, and maybe you'll be sharing some of your Star Trek fiction reads as part of Book Trek. And there you have it. We'll talk to you soon, and thanks a lot.